I think the Montreal Canadiens absolutely make the most sense to me. McDavid needs to go to a team that is already up, still rising. I'd say the Habs are already like a contending team if you want to group them in that window, okay, or in that group. And they have all the assets to make this trade happen, and they wouldn't have to compromise their current roster too badly. I mean, we were talking about this, like, and I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on this. But
7 years. That's how long it's been since Daryl Katz stood in front of a microphone and looked Edmonton fans in the eye. May 7th, 2019. The Oilers had just sleepwalked through another embarrassing season. Todd McClellan was gone. Peter Chiarelli was gone. And the team had missed the playoffs by 10 full points. 10. Not close. Not heartbreaking. Just bad. And this wasn't a one-off. Edmonton had missed the playoffs 12 times in 13 years. 12 times. With Connor McDavid. With Leon Draisaitl. Two of the most gifted hockey players the sport has ever seen. And the organization around them looked like it was being run out of someone's living room. Whispers everywhere. The old boys club pulling strings behind closed doors. Wayne Gretzky floating around in some undefined role. Nobody really knew who was deciding what or why. So Kat showed up, and whatever you thought about him walking in, he didn't hide behind excuses. He stood there and said it plainly. We have not delivered on the promise we made to our fans in recent years. You know it, and I know it, and we all know it. That moment mattered. Not because it fixed anything overnight, but because it was real. It signaled that something had to change, and that the people at the top understood that. And something did change. The noise stopped. The backroom drama dried up. No more red wine summits. No more rumors about ownership overriding hockey decisions. The organization started to feel like an actual NHL franchise rather than a family business with a hockey team attached. That credibility didn't happen by accident. It happened because Katz stepped back, let hockey people run hockey, and trusted the process. Then came August 2023. Bob Nicholson steps aside, and in walks Jeff Jackson. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it should. Jackson was Connor McDavid's agent. He negotiated McDavid's 8-year extension back in 2017. And now, just days after stepping away from representing the player, he was being handed the keys to the entire hockey operation. Ken Holland sitting right beside him, looking like a man who just found out he had a new boss 5 minutes before the press conference started. Strange? A little. But the logic wasn't hard to follow. You want McDavid to stay. You want him bought in. Who better to have running the show than the man McDavid already trusted with his career? Jackson came in with Katz and Paul Coffey reportedly approaching him directly for the role. He'd report to Katz. Coffey would advise. It felt like a real structure, even if it was unconventional. But then November hit, and the season fell apart early. Jay Woodcroft was out. Chris Knobloch was in. Jackson and Coffey stood up at that press conference too. And Coffey, in a move that raised more than a few eyebrows, stepped behind a bench in some capacity. Not for the first time either. He'd done something similar back in 2018 in that strange skills coach experiment, and now here he was again. Some things in Edmonton have a way of coming back around. Fast forward through 2 more seasons. The Oilers don't just get good. They get dangerous. They make it to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final. Game 7. 1 game from the top of mountain. They had McDavid playing like a man possessed, Draisaitl carrying the offense on his back, and a city holding its breath for the first time in decades with genuine reason to believe. They didn't get there. 1 game short. And then this past season happened. It wasn't a slow fade. It wasn't a close call or a tough bounce in overtime. It was a collapse. The kind that makes you rewind the tape and ask serious questions about every decision made over the past 2 years. The kind that makes you wonder if the pieces around your 2 franchise players are actually built to win or just built to look competitive. Now the names being discussed aren't players. They're Chris Knobloch and Stan Bowman. The coach and the general manager. Frank Saravalli reported that a coaching change is more likely than not. And from what's circulating, the front office isn't exactly sitting on safe ground either. So here's the real question. How do you divide the blame? Because this isn't simple. It never is. When a team underperforms at this level, with this kind of talent, the instinct is to point at the coach. Knobloch gets blamed for deployment, for systems, for not getting the most out of the roster. And maybe some of that is fair. But a coach can only work with what he's given. And what Bowman gave him this past season raised real questions. The free agent signings over the last 2 years, some made before Bowman even arrived, some on his watch, paint a picture of an organization that isn't quite sure what it wants to be. There's a disconnect. The players being brought in don't seem to match the way the team wants to play, or the way it needs to play to win in the playoffs, where everything gets tighter, slower, and more physical. You can't paper over roster construction mistakes with talent alone. Not even McDavid's talent. And that brings us back to Jackson. Because at the top of all of this sits the man who built the structure, approved the hires, and set the direction. The question of how much he's steering the ship versus how much he's simply managing the people on it is one that deserves a real answer. Which brings us to the moment that feels eerily familiar. 7 years ago, Edmonton was at a crossroads. The franchise was embarrassing itself despite having the best player in the world. The problems weren't going to fix themselves. Someone at the top had to acknowledge reality, make tough decisions, and point the organization in a new direction. Katz did that in 2019. He showed up, said the hard thing, and then got out of the way and let the right people work. The Oilers are at another crossroads right now. Different problems, but the same weight. Back then, they were trying to figure out how to be a playoff team. Now, they have to figure out how to be a championship team. And that gap, the gap between good enough and good enough to win it all, is where franchises can spend a decade spinning their wheels if they're not careful. McDavid is turning 30. Draisaitl right behind him. The window that felt wide open 2 summers ago is still open, but it is not going to stay that way forever. Every offseason that ends without a ring is one they don't get back. So, what happens now? Does Knobloch get another shot? Or does this organization decide that a fresh voice behind the bench is the answer? Does Bowman keep his job? Or does the roster mismanagement cost him the way it cost Chiarelli back in 2019? Does Jackson stay the course? Or does this season force a harder conversation at the very top of the organization? And maybe most importantly, does Daryl Katz show up again? Not because the team is a disaster. It is not. The core is still elite. The foundation is still there. But because this moment demands leadership from the top, because the decisions made this summer will shape the next 3 to 5 years of this franchise, because Connor McDavid deserves to know that everyone above him is fighting as hard as he is. 7 years ago, Katz looked into the camera and told the truth. Edmonton is still waiting on that Stanley Cup. And right now, the truth might be exactly what this franchise needs to hear again.